My name is Frank Chopp. I'm a state representative for the 43rd District. I'm running in position number 2, and I've been a member of the legislature for a number of years.
And could you tell me a little bit about your district?
Oh, it's a great district. It geographically includes parts of Fremont, Wallingford, Green Lake, University District, Capitol Hill, First Hill, parts of First Hill, and Madison Valley, Montlake, North Capitol Hill. It's a great district, and I'm very proud to have represented it.
And when were you first elected to represent this district?
I started in 1995.
Oh, wow. Okay. And what motivated you to run way back then?
Well, it's the same thing that's motivated me to run this year. I've dedicated my life to economic, social, and racial justice. I started as a community organizer working in a number of nonprofits. The one for a number of years was the Fremont Public Association, which is now called Solid Brown. So I was a community organizer starting a whole long list of social service programs and housing assistance programs, and then also eventually got into advocacy for changing public policy. And so people strongly urged me to run for the legislature back then, as they are now, because there's a great amount of effort that's got to be done over the next 2 years. We've had a very productive last 2 years, going back to 2019 and whatnot. So have gotten a lot done, but there's still more work to do, and people are asking me to work on those things. And I can go into detail about them if you like.
Yeah. Well, I also just kind of want to know, like, in that this time in office, what would you say your biggest accomplishments have been?
Oh, there's a long list.
Yeah.
Well, let me just give you a couple examples.
Yeah.
One a few years ago, then one just recently. I was the one who came up with the idea for Apple Health for all kids. And so we, years ago, created a new program called Apple Health for all kids, which now covers 800,000 young people with free single-payer health care across the state. And it includes all the young people up to 300% of poverty level. So it covers a large number of people, and it's integrally needed to also help on our education system. Because in order to do well in school, you need to be healthy and ready to learn. So we have one of the best, if not the best, children's health program in the nation, and 800,000 young people are on that. So that was a big victory. I organized the coalition for it. I even came up with the name Apple Health because it's, people like apples, and apples the symbol of our state. And the other thing was that it was for all kids, which means that if you're a resident of our state and you're, 18 and below, you get free, universal, single-payer health care for all resident kids, which then also included the ones that were relatively new immigrants too. And so that was a big accomplishment. So that's affected hundreds of thousands of people's lives to the good. And the more recent example is last year I passed the Workforce Education Investment, which we need to get the word out about it quite a bit more, because it's the best financial aid program in the nation by far. I raised the money by a tax on professional services, including taxing Amazon and Microsoft, to come up with $1 billion of new money over 4 years to fund a variety of investments in higher education. The biggest part of it, 70% of the money, goes into free college and university tuition for all low-income students. Okay, and we'd reduce tuition for the ones that are considered more middle income. It's a transformative effort. We enacted it. I came up with the idea about it about 4 years ago, but it took me about 3 years to get everybody to line up and vote for it. But I'm very proud about that, because it's going to help transform our society. A lot of people are talking about economic and social and racial justice. Well, this will help a lot. This effort funds what's called the Washington College Grant, which will benefit, or is benefiting, 120,000 students each year. And that means that they can go through college and university in Washington State for free tuition. And that'll really help people who are coming from low-income families, or that are new immigrants, or first-time person in their family to go to college, and then relieves them of the burden financially, but also basically it empowers them to do well, not only in college and university, but as they go into their careers. So we specifically call it the Workforce Education Investment Act, And the tax I used for it was very, very progressive. And that was just last year in 2019, but it's being implemented starting this September. And it will really make a major difference. I'm very proud about that, in large part because of the vast need to make college more affordable, but also to address the inequities in our society. And one of the best ways to address the inequities is to help people get an education and not charge them an arm and a leg. So I'm so proud because after I did it, these national experts anointed it as the best in the nation by far. And so I'm very proud of those two things. But I could go on for or 12 hours about all the other stuff I've done. It's really, really exciting.
So one of the biggest issues right now is this pandemic. What are your thoughts
Yes.
about how the state has handled it so far and how it should handle it going forward?
Well, I specifically is focused in on actually responding what the needs are. So I listen constantly to my constituents and also advocacy groups, nonprofits, labor unions, et cetera. And so we've working in terms of the pandemic on several fronts, one of which we've urged the governor and we've allocated about $100 million. Actually, I think it's more than that for rental assistance, because I know a lot of people are facing high rents and they need some assistance. So we've dedicated a bunch of money for that. And I have a long history of working in those programs over the years, way before the pandemic, but the pandemic made it all the more obvious. Initially, also, there was this massive unemployment increase. And so I've pulled together a coalition of labor unions and community advocates to propose reforms in the unemployment insurance system so that the benefits are made more available and that we broaden the eligibility so more people can be eligible to receive the unemployment benefits, also increasing the amount you would get. And this is building on top of an unemployment insurance system that in terms of financial benefits to the unemployed, it's one of the best in the nation. But we need to do more, including a $100 million fund approximately for undocumented immigrant workers who, they work in our state, they do very essential work. They pay taxes, they're all over the state, not just in the farming communities. And so, but because of federal law, they don't get an unemployment insurance system. So the proposal we have is to broaden the state unemployment insurance system so that they also will be treated equally, just like any other resident worker. And then in addition to that, there's several other things I've been working on in terms of an agenda for dealing with healthcare. So I have a public priorities and progressive revenue plan. There's three major parts of it. The first part is what I call the Health, Equity, and Recovery Trust, the HEART plan. And in there, there'd be $500 million a year generated with a new progressive tax on a payroll tax on businesses that are doing quite well in this economy, that are paying people over $500,000 a year. So they can afford it. But the money we need is to help in terms of foundational public health, and then behavioral health, and then community health. In the case of public health, it's just, we really need to insist that the state of Washington make sure that these personal protective equipment items and other medical equipment actually are manufactured in our state and kept in storage for the next crisis we have in terms of public health. It was really just a scandal where we were caught like any other place in the country begging around the world for masks and ventilators and things like that. So part of this money would be to grow an industry in our state. So we manufacture these items, but also then store them. So when we have another need for it, they'll be there when we need them. And at the same time, a big part of the crisis that's been going on for some time is the challenges for people with behavioral health issues. I feel very passionately about this. A close family member of mine has serious mental health issues. And so we've been working to invest a lot in a totally reformed system of mental health treatment and also substance use disorder treatment. And so some of the money would go for that. Anyway, I'm going on for a while, but there's several other topics within that plan that I could, well, let me give you two examples that are actually related to the district. I'm the prime sponsor of the legislation and the funding of a new behavioral health teaching hospital at the University of Washington. This is to replace about half of the capacity at Western State Hospital, which has been a scandal in terms of management. And so we would start with a brand new building. We've allocated the funding to build it, but also we need to staff it, and we have the funding for that, so that people, when they need that help, can get it in a much better facility, and also with an effort to not only care for the people that need it immediately, but also train the next workers to be able to expand the workforce for people like psych nurses or substance abuse counselors, mental health workers, things like that. So it's a win-win-win for everybody, and I was the lead on that. Another one that pushed through is what's called the Behavioral Health Institute, which actually will be on the ballot in King County this November. There's a property tax bond issue being proposed by King County. So I work closely with county council members and Dow Constantine, the county executive, to include funding for a new building at Harborview for Behavioral Health Institute, which is intended to be a sort of the welcoming front door for people who've got crises and need to be attended to in a nice setting and therapeutic setting. And at the same time, we also are renovating the old Harborview Hall, which was the old nurses' quarters up at Harborview, for respite care, so that people who are stuck right now in the hospital, in the Harborview hospital rooms, that they would be transitioned out to Harborview Hall, then on to other things in the community like supportive housing. So really, we've already spent 12 minutes here. I could go into great detail about those things. I'm very proud of that, but it's important to realize that when we look at public policies, and particularly in this particular campaign, that we have to move from rhetoric into reality. And that's my expertise, is to listen to the community needs, help formulate solutions, and then get it done. A lot of people like to talk, but I listen, and then I work hard to get major advancements actually in law and funded and built.
Some of the hard work coming up is going to be dealing with these major budgetary shortfalls we're looking at. Do you have any thoughts about how we should be dealing with those?
Yes, I have a plan for that. It's, again, the Public Priorities and Progressive Revenues Plan. And there's three funding sources. And the first one I went on at detail, which is in terms of the HEART plan, the Health Equity and Recovery Trust, which would fund a variety of healthcare programs. And then the second major thing, which would be about $1 billion a year, would be for childcare and early learning, because the system is in danger of collapse in terms of childcare. In fact, they estimated that 20% of the childcare centers around the state have had to close this year because of the pandemic and the economic problems. So that's the second part of the thing. And then the third one is to enact a capital gains tax to help on a variety of fronts, including working families tax credit for low income people that pay too much of their taxes, they deserve some money back. So I'm very involved in the second one I mentioned, which is the early learning and childcare. I'm the lead legislator working with Tana Sen from Mercer Island and Claire Wilson from Federal Way. They're in the legislature, and they're experts on what we need to do to invest in childcare and early learning. And they asked me, which is why one of the reasons I'm running again, they asked me, hey, Frank, since you did all that great stuff for free college and university tuition, can you also do it for childcare and early learning? I said, well, all right, let's try it. So we've been working for about a year to look at different funding sources, and we've settled for now on a source that I call it the Social Security for childcare and early learning. Everybody knows about Social Security, I think, and most people will access it and use it later on in life. So if it's good enough for the old folks, what about the young folks? Because a very small part of our state budget goes into early learning childcare currently. And we got a system that is in desperate need of more investment. So this proposal would be based on a revenue source based on the paid family and medical leave. It's sort of like a version of Social Security. And then we would invest that about $1 billion a year to make improvements in the child care and early learning system, and particularly in terms of paying our teachers and our preschool staff a decent, livable wage, for one thing, and to make sure they got enough training so that the education they provide is good. There's a lot of dedicated people there, but they have to have enough to live on, and they need support to get the training they need to be the best teacher in those settings or best caregiver. And this is extremely important, not only to the family who has kids, but also to the economy, because businesses rely on hiring employees. Well, a lot of those employees over the course of their lifetime do have kids, and they can't go to work unless there's care for their children. And also, we find that the best investment we can make in our future is, in fact, in early learning, birth to 5. At those early ages, that's when a lot of the mental development of a young person is underway. And yet we invest relatively little in that now, but we will, by this process, invest a hell of a lot more into early learning, plus also childcare going up to age 12. And that's, to me, an important point to make, because these programs are not just to help individuals who need the help, but it also helps us build a stronger economy, because you can't go to work unless you got care for your kid in many cases. So that's the big one too. And that's one of the main reasons I'm running again, along with several others.
Another.
By the way, can I, Jason, let me say also that the early parts of that new revenue would in fact go to fill current budget deficits so that we can avoid austerity budget cuts. But as we recover in the economy, then those would be to expand services and expenditures. So, but the first call on it would be to avoid austerity budget cuts. And luckily, in the case of the state budget, we have set aside $3.5 billion in what's called the rainy day fund. So for the next year, I think we can make it work pretty readily. It's more the next 2 or 3 years that we need to focus in on revenue, and to make sure that the revenue is not only going to great purpose, but also is progressive, to make our taxes much more fair.
So another major issue right now, or two issues, is the police brutality and the issues of racial justice. Do you have any thoughts about how the state can work to improve those situations?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've been working with the folks from the Initiative 940 Coalition. They came to us a couple years ago, and they had done a lot of work preparing to how do we address police brutality, because people were being murdered, basically, and treated very unequally, and that's putting it mildly. But there was a major concern. So quite a while ago, well before the recent protests, the coalition got created for Initiative 940. We work with them. That coalition is very diverse, lots of organizations, ranging from ACLU to Andre Taylor, whose brother was actually murdered by the police, and plus a lot of other community organization and advocacy groups. So they came up with a proposal, and we said, hey, this looks great, we're going to pass it. Then when they talked to various people, they listened and they wanted to make some changes. We agreed we would adjust it some. So our effort here is to listen to that coalition, and others too, by the way, and make adjustments in state law, and also support local efforts to demilitarize the police. And so that coalition now has about 6 items they want us to do at the state level, one of which is to reduce or basically ban some very bad practices like chokeholds. Also, make sure we change the accountability so that every police department would have a community oversight board, for example. And there's several other ideas, but I'm so pleased that they came together and came up with a really great approach. We passed what we knew was available then. Now, next year, we need to build on that and go further in terms of police accountability and dealing with those set of issues. At the same time, because of my work over the years on all these other issues, when you deal with racial injustice, you have to look at it from many angles, not just the interactions with police departments. That's why I'm so proud that we did the workforce education investment, because literally now, with that tax I got through, there's $1 billion available, and it's going for free college and university tuition for all low-income students, which means about half of those students are students of color, and they will be able to get a good education, which means that they can get a better paying job later in life and have a much better future for themselves and their families. That is part of racial justice as well. And another example, which I've been working on for some time, and last year we dedicated the second phase of the project, but I don't know if you've ever been out to Sandpoint in Seattle, Jason. Have you? Yeah. Well, all the housing that's out there. Yeah, well, I'm the guy who put it there. And we started with 200 units of housing for homeless people and families. And then we added another 140 units of workforce housing. Just last year, it was opened up. And there's now 350 units of affordable housing. The very high percentage of the residents there are people of color. And this is in a community now that totals up to about 1,000 individuals. I'm the one who led that effort, got it done, and made sure it happened. And the neat thing about it is I had to do it despite opposition from the local community back then. Originally, that community in Northeast Seattle had what are called restrictive covenants on their real estate contracts. When you buy a house, there were restrictive covenants that actually literally banned poor people and people of color from buying a house out there. So it was a lily white neighborhood. And so after the federal government declared that surplus military bases can be used for the homeless, I went out there and grabbed the land, about 18 acres, and started with the homeless housing, and then added workforce housing later for a total of 350 units. And so that consequently is not only helping those individual residents, they have a beautiful place, of course, right in the middle of or next to the park, but it also addresses racial justice. To provide an opportunity for people to live in a community that they were banned from for like decades and decades is a great accomplishment. And so when people say we got to build housing, well, hell, I've built thousands of units housing in coalition with nonprofit agencies, by the way. And it can make a real difference in people's lives, but also make our society much more just.
And so going forward, what would be some of your other legislative priorities?
Well, a big one is climate change. We, a year ago, I helped push through legislation that's called 100% clean electricity. And that is literally the best of its kind in the nation, that kind of mandate. I worked very closely with folks from Climate Solutions and other nonprofit agencies and got the votes together. We passed in the House. The Senate also was able to go along with us this time. And we worked together, and it got an enormous accomplishment. Well, that's great. So now in terms of generating electricity, we are going to be 100% clean electricity in not too far many years. What we want to do next is deal more with the transportation sector, where half the carbon emissions in our state are generated by transportation, cars, trucks, that kind of thing. And so we have a series of proposals working with advocacy groups to actually enact more legislation to really reduce the emissions coming from transportation. And this involves, in part, electrifying as many of our vehicles as we can get, and to do it very precipitously or expeditiously, I should say, because this is only much better for reducing climate emissions or carbon pollution, but also we create jobs. My dad started as a coal miner in the coal mines of Roslyn, Washington, just east of the mountains. He started there working at age 12 as a coal miner assistant. That was horrible times. It was before the Depression and then some. So it's a sort of arc of history for my family. He started out as a young 12-year-old coal miner, which is horrible to think about going to work in the coal mines at age 12. He then was able to get a union electrician's job in the shipyard over in Bremerton, where I grew up. And so it's the fact that you can get off of carbon fuels and onto electrical sources that are clean is like right up the alley for my family, because we strongly believe in that. So consequently, this will not only help save the environment, but also create a lot of jobs, well-paying jobs, well-trained jobs. And so I call this effort the Green Power Blue Collar Coalition, because that's what we need. We need to go forward together to address these issues, including climate change, but also keeping in mind the economic equity that's required, which includes decent pay, investments in apprenticeship programs, and also inclusiveness in terms of the workforce. The workforce in building trades in previous years were pretty much all white. That's changing a lot. A lot more women are becoming electricians, for example, and as well as people of color getting into the construction trade. So that can also help create that added benefit. But climate change is one of the 5 major priorities in my agenda for action that I have. It's on my website, frankchopp.com. And I'm very excited about that because we built this coalition that is electrifying. I basically say that the future is electric, which is a great way of talking about it when you deal with cars, that instead of spewing out exhaust into the air, we're electrifying that system over time as soon as possible to, again, help the environment, but also create jobs.
So we live in very polarized times, and you've been at this for a little bit. How do you work to bring people together?
Well, I can give you lots of examples of that. When I did the earlier this year, because of the snafus with the unemployment insurance system, I literally called together a coalition of about 30 people that are working together to identify specific improvements for unemployment insurance, and then laying out the actual legislation that would pass in preparation for next year. So I just called a lot of people I know from a lot of labor unions, but also other community advocacy groups, say, let us reason together, let's get something done. And it worked. We're meeting regularly, and we're developing the specifics of the legislation, and we go on to that. The same thing on all these other things. Another thing I do is that I listen very carefully to communities throughout the district and throughout the state. So I develop partnerships with a lot of folks, and I can give you a few examples of that. For example, one of my longtime partners in working on these things is Stella Ortega from El Centro de Raza. And so we worked together originally actually to help get the city funding for health and human services and housing, when before the city of Seattle wasn't giving anything to that. So we were successful at that, and then that led to more partnerships, including when we do these housing projects. I've started a program called Home and Hope, where essentially we acquire surplus public properties or nonprofit properties, and then get them acquired, and then we partner with other nonprofits to actually build and own the housing. So in the case of El Centro de Raza, we are working with them. They are running several childcare sites for early learning. And so when we build housing at a particular site, we make sure that we've got other community services there, including early learning and childcare. Let me give you an example. If you've been up to the Roosevelt neighborhood, there's a light rail station underground. Well, I passed a state law that required Sound Transit to give us the air rights above the light rail station for affordable housing and other uses. So eventually Mercy Housing and Bellwether Housing were selected to develop the housing, and then El Centro Raza, we were able to arrange that they would run the early learning center there. So you got 270 units of affordable housing, including special needs housing, and also the early learning center right there, right on top of the light rail station. And we got the land transferred to them at a much reduced price, so they aren't paying the exorbitant real estate costs to this thing. So that's one of many examples. Another example, I partnered closely with Colleen Echohawk at the Chief Seattle Club. They had a real need for new housing for homeless folks, primarily Native Americans. And so we worked with them, got them some state money, brought the other research together, and now they're off and running and developing much more housing for that population. And it's a great success story because you listen to the community for the need, but also you identify leaders who can help us actually get something done. And so I really appreciated that. Another example is Sharon Lee with the Long Housing Institute. I started that organization about 25 years ago, and she has been just a wonderful director of that. And there are thousands and thousands of units that the Low Income Housing Institute has developed, in partnership with me, because one of the things we did at the state level was create a thing called the Washington State Housing Trust Fund. And we've invested more than $1 billion through that state fund for affordable housing. And Lehigh was part of that. In fact, Sharon and I were the ones who started the Housing Trust Fund at the state level. And then we've expanded over time to other funds as well. So, I've directly led on efforts that have generated over $2 billion of money dedicated for housing, including helping 300 apartment buildings in Seattle, of which I think it's a little less than 100 that are in the 43rd district alone. And so those are, opportunities where you can listen to the community, identify the needs, identify the solutions or the projects or the programs, and then work in partnership through a coalition and through a real leadership from the community and legislative leadership to get it done. Thousands and thousands of units have been created through that just for the affordable housing. And right now, we're working actually with the county and the city. I had a meeting earlier today with Teresa Mosqueda about getting additional funding through her Jumpstart proposal, which we worked together. I've worked together with Teresa for many years. And so pleased that the city did the Jumpstart program. And so we're talking about how that money can be used for a lot of these projects to actually get stuff done. It's very exciting, and she's great to work with.
Do you have any final thoughts about why people should be giving you their vote?
Well, I think they should give me their votes in part because I see the community needs there. I have an agenda for action, and it's tangible about getting these things done. And it involves what I've already mentioned about free college and university tuition, massively great, best in the nation, to take action on climate. Again, 100% clean electricity, best in the nation. Also investing in healthcare, and we have the Apple Health program for others, for young kids, but we also expanded it for large new programs to help folks with long-term care. We passed the Long-Term Care Trust Fund in 2019, which is the first in the nation, to help people later on in life when they need services for long-term care. But also we did the first public option for healthcare in the nation. So it's called Cascade Care. We passed it in 2019 with a lot of help from David Frost, who's a senator, and Eileen Cody in the House, along with my help, to really come up with the right approach. And that's being implemented. The first in the nation, best of the nation, obviously. And it provides an affordable healthcare option for everybody, which, at the federal level, they talk about, well, let's have a public option. Well, we already did it in Washington State. People at the national level say, hey, let's do a free college tuition for some. Well, hell, we already done it in Washington State in a big way, best in the nation. So I get excited about seeing these challenges and assembling the coalitions and folks to really not only see the need, come up with the solutions, and then get it done. And so I think people should recognize that in the next couple of years, because we're going to go through some trying times because of the budget, but I have the experience and the effectiveness and the energy and the ideas to actually make a major impact, not only for my district, but for people throughout the state. So I greatly appreciate people's votes.
And if people want to learn more about you and your campaign, where should they go?
My website is frankchopp.com, and you can find all sorts of information there.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jason. And, if you have any feedback, let me know. But thanks for the opportunity to talk with you. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Talk to Seattle, and I've been your host, Jason Rigdon. If you liked this episode, would you please share it on social media? Most podcast clients have a little share button. Click that and tell people why they should listen. If you want to support Talk to Seattle, would you please give the show a rating and review on iTunes? It really helps new people discover the show, and it makes me happy. Follow Talk to Seattle on Twitter at TalkToSeattle, and email any questions, comments, or suggestions to jasonrigdon@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening.